I like nice mustard. I always do appreciate a good mustard.
My favorite color. I don't know why.
Like my
Mustard. Good
it's like my third favorite color.
Good
morning,
morning.
Claudine.
How's everybody?
Good morning.
Good. Good.
Okay.
What's that noise?
I don't know.
I'm not sure. It sounds like a microphone.
I don't think it's me.
How's school going, Chantel?
We're making it.
Okay.
We're making it. He's upstairs right now.
Oh, he's
He's right now.
okay.
We just make it to Friday.
I hear that a lot. You waiting for Vernon?
Yes. Mr. Gann, I just shot Commissioner Rita a text message. But I'll give him about another minute and we'll get started just to be respectful of everyone's time.
Sounds good.
Mr. Gann, we can go ahead and get started.
All right. I saw our first presenter videoed anyway, so to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending the March 16th Public Operations Committee meeting. We can get started with our first presentation, the New Enterprise Resource Planning Project Update, or as we call it, the ERP Project Update.
Good morning, everyone. This is Anand from IT, Director for Application Services. Today, we are presenting our quarterly update to New Enterprise Resource Planning project. This is to replace our existing payroll, human capital, as well as finance modules, business operations software system. And today I have here Tylish Watkins, which is our city schools project manager for this project. And also we have Melissa Miller from Plan Moran, our hired firm to oversee the project and also oversee the contract and as well as the implementation part. Now I'll hand it over to Melissa, please.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. So we've got a quick update to give you on the ERP project. We're going to just remind you of the organizational structure and the roles for the project, give you a status update, talk about our key dates and next steps. And then there is a staff augmentation piece that Talish will cover with you. So just as a reminder, this is being led by an executive steering committee of chiefs from finance, HR, and IT, with Tylesh Watkins as the project manager for city schools, working with a selection committee that represents all of those functional areas that are in the bottom box. So all of your core finance, budgeting, grants, position management, procurement, as well as your core HC functions, professional development, talent acquisition, payroll, and time and attendance, and then the technology team. So those are the committee members who are doing the selection, and we are supported by procurement and legal leads of Ted King and Justin. All right, so where we are is in phase 3. We are in the evaluation and selection of vendors. So we had proposals. We put an RFP out in the fall. In early November, the proposals from the vendors came back, and we are still in the process of evaluating the best fit vendor. So we've gone through an evaluation of the written proposals that were submitted. And from those written submissions of 8 vendors, we were able to shortlist 5 vendors, actually 4 products, but 2 implementers of the same product. And then in January, we did a series of vendor demonstrations. So each vendor came in for 3 days and actually demonstrated their product functionality for the team. As a result of those, we had 4 full weeks of product demonstrations. As a result of that, the committee then has gone down to 2 products from 4. So they're now doing what we call due diligence activities on 2 potential software products for the district. So due diligence activities include activities such as doing reference checks, right? So we call peer school districts across the country who are using these software products, and we ask them about their experience with both the product and the implementation. The next thing that we will be doing is talking to them about, the site visits that we will do. We will actually do virtual site visits. We'll spend more in-depth time looking at each of the products, but I do have a chart on that in a few slides. So we want to go to the next slide. Here are some key dates. Again, we kicked this off just about a year ago. We worked on getting the RFP out on the streets. As I said, it was released in September. It was released in October. It came back in November. It was a little later than we had anticipated. The preliminary selection happened in December, where we evaluated and selected 5. We did the vendor demonstrations, as I said, in the weeks of January. And now we're moving into the due diligence activities. Our final selection, we're hoping right now, as you can see in the planned column, to be able to complete that sometime in April, but it really depends on our ability to get all of the due diligence activities completed. I want to note that the reason that that timeline is a little uncertain is you are needing to rely on your peers in K-12 education across the country. And they are all facing similar challenges to city schools with the COVID issues and the reopening of schools. Some of them have been doing their ERP implementations virtually. So they find themselves with a very heavy workload. So when we're asking them to give us their time, so we can do a reference check or we can do a virtual site visit, we're really dependent on the time that they have available. So it's not our timing. You know, we can't say we want to get all of this done in March and get it done in March if those school districts really don't have the time to talk to us in March. So we're working diligently. We're working every day. We're reaching out to these districts. We're trying to get timelines set, but that's where the uncertainty plays in and when we will complete due diligence and be able to move on to final selection. So the next slide is just some of the updates I was giving you verbally. So we did the 4 weeks of vendor demonstrations. Everybody then responded to a survey so we could understand those individuals who participated in the vendor demonstrations. As you can see, there were 60 to 70 staff present for a portion of each of the demos. So they gave us their feedback. They told us what they thought was the best fit. They told us where their concerns were. They told us what they wanted to see some additional follow-up. So after we shortlisted it, we began the due diligence with reference checks, virtual site visits with peer districts. The third thing we are doing in this due diligence is we're doing some follow-up. So we saw vendor demonstrations, but we didn't really understand everything we wanted to about their budget tool. So we're asking them to come back in and do a deep dive and answer more of our questions about specific functionality. So that is also what we're doing in the month of March, in addition to the reference checks and virtual site visits. Right now, we're trying to schedule the virtual site visits. We have the peer districts identified, so we're just going through that process. Our next step, once we complete all of those activities, will be to do a best and final offer, a BAFO, with each of the software products that are still in the running, so that we can gather all of that information, take it back to your selection committee, and have the selection committee actually make a final decision. Right. So once the final decision is made, we would move into our contract and implementation phase. So contract negotiations would happen. We are estimating in the May to July period. We will be doing contracts about the software itself, the implementers of that software, as well as the statement of work and the timeline. And then once that contract is negotiated, it would go to the board for approval, and then we would begin the implementation process. We are envisioning the implementation process to take, approximately a 2-year period. We won't know for sure until we select our final vendor in phase 4 and we do the contract negotiations, because the timeline will be part of those negotiations. All right. So I don't know if this is the appropriate time to ask if there's any questions about that, or Ty, do you want to talk about the staff augmentation first?
Ms. Miller, you can continue if you like.
So are there any questions about what we just quickly went through with the group?
I don't have any questions at this point.
Okay, thank you.
There are no questions at this point. You can move forward.
Great. Ty?
Sure. So thank you, Melissa. So we have been discussing staff augmentation. I think we alluded to it in the last in our last presentation as well. But at this time, we feel like we're in a good space to move forward. And so we've already reached out to our contractor vendors to get resumes so that we can start interviewing for someone that would be able to assist us with on the ERP side with our financials and payroll operational tasks so that the team can be prepared by July to move forward with an implementation. We are also meeting with finance and HC to see if we can get that same process started. So I anticipate that by the time we have our next presentation, we'll have more details on whether or not those positions have been filled.
If we could go back to slide 5 really quick, because I just do want to point out a couple of points. Thank you. So as you can see, we had target dates, the actual dates, and we have planned dates. And I think it's important to understand why we've had some delay in the schedule. The first piece being in our RFP release and due dates. We were about a month behind where we had anticipated being, but I think it's important for this group to know that that was intentional from the perspective of we didn't want to release the RFP until the city schools team was certain it represented all of the requirements that they needed and that they were certain that the legal terms and conditions within the RFP were the best they could be. So you had some change in your legal organization, you had some new people come in and take a look at some of the terms and conditions and decided that we wanted to invest that extra time up front in making sure that the RFP represented the terms and conditions you would actually need to have in place. So that can shorten the negotiation period. So the contract negotiation period, where we say it's typically 3 months, your legal team and your procurement team did such an excellent job spending that extra time to make sure that your RFP had everything it needed, that we anticipate contract negotiations will be much smoother and much quicker. So that was a good investment of time there. The other thing is the preliminary selection is taking longer than we had anticipated, but that is due to the commitment of your team to make the right choice. They really want to understand what their options are. So instead of just doing the 3 days of demos and making a decision based on the demonstrations, they've asked for follow-up. If they have a question about, will this budget solution work for us, they're asking the vendor to come back in and give them clarification. They're really committed to making the very best choice possible. So they're taking a little extra time, but it's intentional time. And then I explain where we're kind of losing control of the timing a little bit is the due diligence activities, because that is where we're reliant on other peer districts. And I know you know everything you've gone through. They're in that same position, trying to balance their operations, reopening their schools, all of the COVID issues, and trying to be a good peer in the K-12 community and give us the time we need. So thank you for the opportunity to explain that to you. I thought it was important.
I believe I see a hand. I want to open the floor for my colleagues. Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies. Sorry to be a little tardy. I guess I'm thinking about the big picture, top-down look for the full board. I guess, will there be some point that we speak to the issue of the connectivity between IT, finance, and human capital, and also make us feel comfortable about the effectiveness and the efficiencies of the new process? I mean, you bring in a new process, you hope that the new process is a lot better than the old process. I'm sure it will be. But there is is there a certain presentation or delivery to us as board members to make us feel comfortable about it being effective, it being efficient, in the connectivity between those three different groups that you prioritize, IT, human capital, and finance, are strong, solid, and can last for 10 years?
So from my perspective, in helping you through this process, your selection committee is made up of all of those core team members, and they're all trying to work together to find the best solution for city schools. They're not sub-optimizing and saying, I need to pick the best HC solution. And I don't care if the finance side of the solution is good. They are really working together in a very cooperative and collaborative process. The 16 selection committee members represent all of those groups. And so it's been a very positive experience to see how they work together and how they're considering the best interest. Any software solution is going to be stronger in some areas than others. It's just the nature of, software, right? But your team is working together very collaborative to ensure that the solution they pick will meet the minimum requirements for all of those teams. And when we do move forward and there is a selected product to bring to the board and for contract approval, and you've got your new product in here, that's where we'll start our change management. And I think that's the appropriate time to come to the board with, here's what this implementation looks like, and here's how collaboratively we're going to work together to make that happen. Anand, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for that answer. Yes, Commissioner Reed. As a selection committee member and also steering committee, we have representative from each and every office, and we are working together and to find a best product, which is one integrated tool to accommodate and serve our business. And also we are looking at the tools that are best in breed, which can also support the business needs and also to meet the existing gaps, and also can sustain with 21st century technology tools and technologies. So those are the experts. We are looking at it, and the selection committee is coming along and giving the recommendations during our vendor demonstration, and also narrowing down the best two products where we are currently looking into the reference check and everything. It's a collaborative effort. It's not just IT's project or finance project or HC's project. It's like a school district's project, and we are all working together in that aspect. Once the product is selected, yes, then we need to go and look at it, all the policies and the process, and then we need to see how we can improvise that part. Yes, that is the second, the phase 5 part of this project.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bondima, did you have any questions or remarks?
No, thank you. No, thank you very much.
Okay. I do have a few remarks. One, Ms. Miller, I appreciate you circling back for highlighting the RFP, moving forward with the RFP process, the delay. I believe you provided that update also for the December ERP update. So thank you for highlighting that again. I also want to highlight, I can appreciate the due diligence being done around the additional steps being taken outside of just the reference checks and the virtual site visits, just to ensure the robust oversight around what that looks like truly for our district. I think my only question is around understanding that phase 5 is variable based off of the selected vendor. What is the ideal target date for full implementation? If we have, I think it's on slide 7, where it could be somewhere between 2021 2023. Do we have a goal or a target implementation date for full implementation of this overhaul?
So both products currently under consideration have a similar timeline. but they do it in a phased approach. So they are recommending you bring up finance and procurement first, and then there would potentially be like a 6 to 9 month delay in bringing up human capital and payroll. That's very typical in the industry. They don't like to bring everything live at once, because a couple of reasons. You don't have all the resources and all the manpower to churn through all of that at the same time. So to make it manageable and to help really balance the workload on your IT team, they do this in a phased approach. So the first phase they've said will take between 12 and 18 months. And so that would be your finance and your procurement. It depends on the product, right? So each product has a little slightly different timeline. So one may be 12 months, one may be 18 months. And it depends on when we start, because you'll want to go live on a natural business cycle, right? So ideally, you would bring finance up at the start of a new fiscal year. So your whole new budget for your whole, school year is on one system. That's not always the case. So it really is dependent on when the board approves this contract and when the vendor's ready to start implementation. We would look at the natural cycles. The natural cycles are typically July 1st or January 1st. But if we can't fit into those, then we would pick alternative timelines. So that's why we say it's really a 2-year thing. If you start the finance and the procurement, you bring them live 6 months, and it takes 18 months. 6 months later, you bring HR and payroll live. That's where you get the 24-month timeline. If that makes sense?
That makes perfect sense. If I can, could I flag for you that I think it would be really helpful for the board that once we do identify a vendor, if the future ERP updates could include what that timeline looks like for the full board, that would be very helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You will start to live or die by that timeline that the vendor puts together for the implementation. So definitely we'll start including that as soon as we have a selected vendor.
Thank you so much, Ms. Miller. Are there any questions from my colleagues?
No.
Thank you so much. We can prepare for the next presentation, which is the school police update.
One second. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. My name is Major Coleman. I'm going to be filling in for Chief Ham. He's a little under the weather today. The mission of, I'm sure that you all know the mission of the Baltimore City School Police, to maintain safety in the learning environments. And we accomplish this by building positive relationships with the students and the staff, and providing police services and equity and impartiality. Our deployment strategy for school year 19 and 20, we increased the presence of the officers, allowing them to build positive relationships within the school community. However, with the pandemic of last year, 2021, we had to change our deployment strategy, and we supported the device and the COVID sites. They did a lot, the city conducted a lot of COVID testing sites, and they asked for our assistance in providing security there. And we supported the mill sites and just the distribution of the devices for this district. Last year, of course, the school year 2021, there was no arrests. However, we did have a reduction in school year 19 and 20, down to 19 arrests compared to the year before, the 36 arrests. Some of the types of arrests that we had were attacks on adults, seven attacks on adults, 6 on students, threats to adults, 2 firearms, 1 arson, and another weapon was used, and that was mace, and it was used in an aggravated assault against another student. So that's why we have other arrests there for a different type of weapon. Of course, in the 1920, we did several outreach programs throughout the community, trying to build positive relationships with the students as well as some of the community members, such as food drives, donuts with dads, the school police fashion show. We participated along with students. We did the shop with a cop, and we're also doing the Explorer program. Last year, we weren't able to do that. However, we did support students that were identified by some of the school administrators with Thanksgiving baskets, and we couldn't do shop with a cop. However, we donated gift cards to those families. We just took them to those locations. In school year in 1920, we continued to grow our AAA Safety Patrol program. Right now, Baltimore City has the largest AAA program in the state of Maryland with over 1,000 students. And some of the ongoing trainings that we're doing is, of course, the restorative practice, peer mediation, school climate, historical racial content, and we're also conducting more de-escalation training. Go to the next slide. Our professional development is, of course, with restorative practices, and again, the de-escalation training that we're doing. And the purpose of the restorative practices helps the officers to build relationships oriented and getting to know the kids in a proactive manner. And it's in a non-law enforcement capacity. Just getting into the schools, working with the kids, getting to know them, not in a police manner where they're either a victim or a suspect in a crime or anything like that. Go to the next one. Continued with the restorative practices. You can go forward, Joe. In the current update right now, we're working with the legal departments to conduct a comprehensive review of our policies. And we're also working with Baltimore City Police Department to review and see how we can strengthen the MOU with the police department. We're looking at using some of the consent decree that the police department is under and how we can build that better with the Justice Department. And we're also increasing our de-escalation. The next steps, of course, would be working with legal for the general orders and annual school police report card. However, the report card, I do not believe that it's going to be disseminated next month as it was scheduled to be, because the mass number of students are not in the buildings to interact with the school police office to give a fair evaluation of that report on that report card. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Major Coleman. I will open the floor to my colleagues. I believe I see Commissioner Bondima.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I do understand what you're saying about the fact that because schools have not been in session like we normally have it throughout the year, but then you would have situations where you would have officers that's available to do other projects. What are we doing with the officers or school police who have additional time? How are we, I heard what you said, but how are we using them so that they can be, it can be beneficial to the schools so that when they're available, I know they're doing meals and they're doing COVID testing. So what are you doing with the other available time? How are they spending their excess time?
Well, they were supporting the device distribution as the system was disseminating the devices. They were supporting the devices, also increased the patrols because we had an uptick in burglaries somewhat throughout the year. So we've increased the patrols on all of the shifts. Some of the officers were put on the evening shift and the night shift to increase those patrols.
I also have a note. Were you finished? I'm sorry.
No, yeah,
okay. Thank you. Another question. I know this is old school, and I know it is when I say this, that when students are missing and late or whatever, they would sometimes they would have before they had school police they would have officers to maybe try to locate where they are. They might be in the street somewhere. When you see students outside where they look like they should be home working on their computers, are do we do anything about that? What are we doing, or do you participate in that process?
I know some school managers have reached out to us as kids that were not logging on and asked us to do follow-ups and check if they could not locate the kid, or if the administration have reached out to the family trying to locate the kid and were not successful. They've asked us to stop by the houses to go out and try to contact them, and we have done that.
Oh, so that's not, it isn't a problem for an officer to go past the student's house? It doesn't create a problem?
Well, we first try to have the administration to reach out to the parents through whatever numbers that they have. However, there are cases where they weren't able to reach them, so they asked us to go by. We do condition checks to make sure that everything's okay. The kid haven't logged on in a week or so, so we need to find out what's going on in the family.
Okay, thank you very much.
Commissioner Reed.
Thank you, Major Coleman. I appreciate your time and your presentation. You said 3 words that really resonate with me, at least in terms of the system, which have been emphasized. You said restorative practices, you said de-escalation training, and you said proactive. In terms of the whole idea of being proactive, we all understand why there are less arrests, because there are less people in schools and there are less in terms of conflict. But how do you work with the social workers, the psychologists, the principals, with the whole other side of the equation, which is the trauma? Because you probably see it more than anybody, the trauma in terms of social emotional trauma. Kids don't show up at school, therefore you can't see them at the door saying, looks like you've been abused, looks like you're having a tough time, look like somebody's trying to hurt you. How do you guys attack what you don't see because you're not in the building, but you know it's there?
One of the things that wasn't listed on the training is that all of our officers have trauma-informed care. Okay. All of them go through trauma-informed care for the kids. And so one of the things that we do, we have a strong relationship with our related services department, Dr. Claudia Webb, Dr. Deborah Brooks' office, and we do a lot of interaction with them. So if we, even when the kids are in school, if we see that the kid is acting in a way, when the officers have built relationships with them and they see that the kid is acting a little different that day, we refer them to try to follow up, see what's going on with the kid. A lot of times the officers know the kids, and they just, by that conversation, they say, something's a little different today. So maybe he needs to talk to a counselor, maybe I need to advise the administrator, and they can have a conference with the kid and try to find out what's going on. That's okay. One of the things that the officers do. That's really good. I don't know if you're going to speak to the greater board at some point, but I would definitely include that if you do. Okay. And Madam Chair, may I ask another question? Sure. Okay. This question's like, it's the delicate dance. We have some schools that don't have a lot of problems, and right. They say they don't need police. And there are some schools that have a hell of a lot of problems. We know they need the police. Right. So how do you handle that delicate dance? I'm not naming schools, and you're not going to name schools, I'm sure. But no. How do you handle that complexity in terms of schools where you know you need to be versus schools where they don't think they need you, but you know they need you? So how do you guys handle that delicate dance with the whole student population, so to speak? The way we have our officers deployed, we have a mobile section, the officers that do patrol. So we try to have our officers that do the patrol to do more visits at those schools and engage kids in a non-law enforcement capacity. Just going in, stopping in, sit down, have lunch in that building, talk to the kids. Kids will come up and talk to you if you just stop in the school and you sit down and have lunch in that cafeteria. You don't have to be there for no particular reason. Just stop in it and have lunch. A kid's going to come over and talk to you because most of them are curious why you're there. But that's a way of you can engage them. Just during the dismissal time, just show up, just stand outside, have a nice day, just speak to them, just engage them that way. Everything does not have to be a law enforcement interaction. It can be a non-law enforcement interaction, and that's how you build a relationship with the kids.
Thank
and
you.
get to know. Mhm.
Major Coleman, just a couple remarks. I believe on slide 4 and 5, where there was data around with the continued reduction in arrests. I
Yes.
believe in committee, we've seen that information disaggregated out by grade band, race, and gender before. And I could be thinking of another report, but I do know that that would be helpful at the next update.
Okay.
Also, I think the discussion that we're having around the intentional efforts for school police to engage with our student wholeness efforts, um, if we could see more more examples of, or if you are able to highlight that a bit more in the next update, that would be
Some of
really
the,
helpful to
some of the
see.
interaction with the related services, is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
absolutely. If we could see more of that. And
Mhm.
I think that is all that I had. It was just those two notes. And I think that would land somewhere around slide 9 for those related services. Vernon was, Commissioner Reed was able to pose this question. We had similar questions. Did anyone else have any follow-up questions for Major Coleman?
Yeah, this gets back to something you said earlier, Major Coleman, and also back to what the chair said in terms of wholeness efforts. I'm a problem kid. The school police knows I'm a problem kid. So in terms of restorative practices, would you spend more time or more engagement with me knowing that I'm the fuse that's going to light the fire, so to speak?
I think that we'd have to be how susceptible you are. If I can walk in, I can engage you, I can build a relationship with you, I'm going to make every effort to build a relationship with you, because then I can see, as I build this relationship, I can look at you, I can tell what triggers you, what's not. And when you're acting out of sort, or if you're going through a crisis, then perhaps I can refer you to someone, or sometimes you may just need to talk.
Okay.
I'll be there to talk to you sometime. And if you have a concern, you can come to me. That's how you build the relationships, and that's how we were able to have a decrease in the arrest that we have.
Okay, so the flip side is there are some kids that you can't build a relationship with, you're saying, right?
I'm sure there are.
And
There are some kids who, just because of the climate, just don't interact with police officers.
right. Okay. And then we find other resources, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Major Coleman.
Okay. No more questions?
Thank you.
No.
We can welcome the representative from procurement.
Good morning, everyone. We have several items on the procurement agenda today. Would you like me to walk through all of them, or are there specific items you already have questions on?
Can I make a excuse me, go ahead.
Go ahead, Commissioner Bondima.
No, I was wondering we could make a recommendation because it's pretty cut and clear, but I do have some questions about one of the procurement items. So unless it's up to you. I only have one question.
I think we should walk through them each, since we do have a significant amount of time left. I think for a matter of record, it would be best to walk through each one.
Okay. The first item is a increase in spending authority for a contract that is mostly used by the 21st Century Program to purchase furniture. There are two companies that we use for this. This will increase the contract from 19.1 million to 29.1 million, so for a total increase of 10 million. We have already executed the 2-year extension that was previously approved. This is just asking for additional spending authority from the board to complete that process for several of the Plan Year 2 schools.
Does anyone have any questions around that procurement?
No.
Okay.
The next item is for elevator modernization at Furman Templeton. This was an IFB, so it goes out to bid, several bids come in, and then we select the vendor based on the pricing that is provided in that IFB process. So it is for $364,910.
Does anyone have any questions around this procurement?
Yeah.
The next item is for the QSS International. It's a fire alarm upgrade at Falstaff, similar process. And the bid for this one was $323,460.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
The next item also for construction is the Temp Air Company. It's a pipe insulation project at Coldstream Park. Again, an IFB process, and the total bid amount was $291,170.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
The next item is for lease agreements with our Head Start partners. So this is the Y of Central Maryland. They have they lease space in several buildings that you see listed here. This is the agreement that reaffirms that relationship at these schools for the space.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes. I guess 4 and 5 are probably related in terms of the dynamics. Again, my question is, in light of COVID, how are we reconfiguring the whole process in terms of kids being in the building? Because everything I see is the population grouping for pre-K and younger are lower than any other group in terms of attending buildings. So based on COVID, how does that impact on the YMCA and the Catholic Charities in terms of using those buildings? And is there anything different we had to do because of COVID for these two relationships in these two buildings? I mean, these 17 buildings.
Is there anyone on the call right now that has the programmatic answer to that? If not, we can make sure that we get that to the board before the meeting next week.
Yeah, because it's 17 buildings and COVID and young kids. So I'm sure that.
So good morning, everyone. Greg Gamble should be on the call in order to answer the content question.
Yes. Hi, everyone. This is Gregory Gamble. I'm the real estate agent. And you're saying that the question is, what are we doing differently for the Head Start program? Just want to make sure that I completely understand the question.
Yeah, COVID's changed a lot. We have 17 buildings, really young kids. So what's the dynamic in terms of their attendance, their needs, Head Start configurations based on COVID?
Okay. Currently, right now, none of the Head Start programs in our buildings are operating. They are operating all virtually. Okay. So there are no children in attendance at either one of those 17 sites and any of the other Head Start programs are in our buildings.
And so just to further add on to Greg's response, I think the other piece is that we would be following some of the same protocols, health and safety protocols, and also social distancing, all of those various elements, the same as we are with our pre-K students who are coming back into our buildings in April, and our kindergarten students who are currently in our facilities too. So as they are signing on to the lease, they are also signing on to our health and safety protocols and all of the other standard operating procedures that we are following now. They would also be following it too. And I don't know if that addresses your question.
Chief, thank you for the answer. And do you have any concerns?
We don't at this time have any concerns. It's one of the reasons why we kind of put a pause to a lot of the programs coming back into our buildings, because we wanted to make sure that we had our own protocols in place that they were working before it was something that we were requiring of other folks who were going to be using our facilities. So we also had models in place, and schools were already practicing these various things so that as younger students are coming back into our buildings, we have, as I said before, health and safety protocols that have already been established, and we've been using them and implementing them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Washington. Ms. Wilson?
It looks like Commissioner Bondima has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Bondima?
Yeah, I did have my hand up, and sometimes I can't tell whether it's up or down. But I think that Dr. Washington sort of answered questions that we've had throughout the whole process of getting our kids back to school. And one thing that popped in my mind, I think you did answer, Dr. Washington. My great concern is that when we go through the process and protocol of sterilizing and preparing the rooms and for the students come back, do we do that? This is my question. Do we do that every day after the students leave the environment? Do we repeat all the process of cleansing, and do we do that every single day?
So there's levels of frequency around different types of cleaning. So there is the thorough cleaning that happens when students are coming back into the spaces, and then there is an evening cleaning that happens with custodians when they're also going through the spaces. I will say that for the Head Start programs, our custodians are not supporting some of the spaces with our external partners. And so again, we provide the same kind of guidance that we would give to custodians about how they should be maintaining their spaces. But they also, being under it's a separate program, they're utilizing our buildings. They may also have different health and safety protocols that may be more extensive than our protocols too, because again, it's a program that is using our facilities and they have other requirements that they are being held to.
So do we understand that as well? So because they have their requirements, do we, because they're our kids as well, do we check to make sure, or are they responsible for letting us know what they're doing, what their protocol happens to be? Or do we know their process? Do we know what they're doing?
So I think we have a general understanding, but I'm gonna let Greg, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. All of the Head Start programs, they follow everything that MSDE sets, and their standards are they're comparable to ours, and in some cases they're a little higher than ours. Yes, and each Head Start, they have the option. They can bring in their own cleaners, or they can share the contract with the school and use the cleaners that the school uses. They have that option, but they follow everything to the letter of what MSDE says, and then MSDE does go out and they actually do checks on them too.
Thank you.
Oh, no
Thanks,
problem.
Greg.
All right, the next item is for roof system inspections, and it's for restoration engineering and soil and land use technology. This is a requirements contract that has a contract term of March 24th, 2021 through March 23rd, 2024 with 1 2-year renewal option and an estimated annual amount of $200,000 a year.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
The next item is for preventative maintenance and repairs for HVAC automation and control systems in the building. Again, this is a contract term, requirements contract with a contract term of July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2026 for a contract amount of $1.9 million.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, I do.
Commissioner
I
Bondima?
think that think my printout is off track. Is this number 7? What's
Yes.
industry? I'm a little bit confused, and maybe you can unconfuse me. When you list in here repair service at various city schools at $1.9 million, when you say various city schools from July 21st to the 26th, how do you determine how many, with that amount of money, how do you determine how many schools you're gonna actually work with? You could, when you say various, that's a problem for me, because various could be 10 schools or it could be 100 schools. At some point during that 5-year period, when they're working under that amount of money, it could be more than they calculated. How do you calculate how much you're going to spend, how much you're going to pay in a 5-year period? Because it seems to me that just saying various is not, it's a problem. And then after 5 years or up to 5 years, when they might want to renew their contract, or within that 5 years, not up to that point, they might say, we need more money.
So I'm going to first allow Blaine Lipsky, who should be on the call. I don't know if Blaine is on the call.
Morning, this is Blaine Lipsky with Facility Operations. Paragraph 3 actually lists the 24 sites, and I can amend the language to say from various to identified sites at this time. The 2021 through 2026 is a 5-year contract, and it's approximately $380,000 per year. So with that, we have a contract with them to provide services such as maintaining, updating, and providing on-site technician services, as well as remote operations for this contract. The 24 schools, including North Avenue, the HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, are controlled by Controls building automation system, which is a Siemens control system. We have other schools that have the Metasys, that is a Johnson Control software building automation system, and a Train system. So this is one of the 3 that we have on throughout the district. So I can adjust the language for various to include identified schools at this time. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. But the other question, and thank you for that. But the other question that I have, if you already have determined 24 schools plus North Avenue, somewhere along the line in 5 years, it's going to probably be, it might change. Not necessarily, but I would guess in 5 years it would. So what would you do? You would resubmit a contract or procurement contract to increase that amount from 1.9 to an increase?
If that was the case, we would have to come back to the board if we were to increase the number of schools or the amount, we would come back to the school to request and also identify any additional additions to the contract. So in order for them to be paid. Now, I can tell you that our district, we inherited, this was from the ESCO days when we inherited, we had the 5 ESCOs, if you remember, energy saving companies. We had Johnson Controls, Pepco, Noresco, and some 2 other ones. And the school district chose the systems Metasys, Train, and Siemens. And this is the carryover. We had an existing contract, but it expired. So Siemens has been maintaining these 24 schools for the last 5-6 years, but the contract expired and we had to come back up for renewal. So yes, we would come back to the school board with new information and updates if it was necessary through the next 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Did answer my question. Thank you very much.
Okay.
The next item is for swimming pool replacement at Western High School. It is for AR Mariani Incorporated, and it's for a total amount of $2,942,540. there any questions?
I have a question from Commissioner McFadden that is closely related to this procurement, but not related specific to this scope of work. So Commissioner McFadden question, he says that he raised a while back about the Poly-Western, I'm sorry about that. He raised a question a while back about the Poly-Western auditorium. This space is in need of major upgrades. The ventilation, cooling and heating, the lighting, the stage floor, which poses major safety concerns for students and staff, etc. What are the plans for the school's auditorium?
So that one I'm going to defer to Dorothy Hellman with the 21st Century Office, because that's a school that is going to be going under a major renovation.
Good morning, commissioners. Very happy that you're asking about Poly-Western. It's a part of the feasibility studies that are being held right now with the MSA and with a few architects. The feasibility studies will be completed, let's say by summer of this year, and they will be presented to you as the board. The upgrade of the auditorium and several other renovations to the schools, both schools, will be presented at that time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hellman.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Bondima, your hand is up. Is that an old hand or a new hand?
Thank you.
Oh, okay. The the last item on the agenda today is for Power School Group. This is a contract amendment. It is expanding the services provided under the original board approval, as well as increasing the total contract amount from $779,404 for the 5-year term to $1,092 or $1,092,521.
Does anyone have questions for that last procurement?
Yeah, I guess Vernon Reed here. I guess I'm just trying to go back. I read it a couple days ago, but how is this fully integrated with the ERP rollout? Since we don't know what the ERP rollout is, how do you discern it being fully integrated? And also in layman terms, what are we getting with this whole Power School Gap thing? What are we really getting?
Hi, Commissioner Reed. With respect to the first question, what I'll share is that this update to the contract with Power School in part changes from a couple of option years to a firm end date of 2023. And what we tried to share in here is that that timing was selected to align with when we expect to have the human capital elements of an eventual ERP in place. You heard earlier from Ms. Miller that the timeline for implementation is about 18 months after selection of the vendor. So we believe that we will need to continue with the services we have from Power School through early 2023, with the intention being that thereafter, whatever we are using Power School for now would be transitioned to whatever the final ERP solution is, which hopefully will be a fully integrated option, and that's what we'll determine through the rest of our selection process for the ERP. The second question you asked, what are we getting? I'll say that the pre-existing board approval was for elements of Power School solution that are focused on support for qualified observers, principals, and others who are conducting observations and evaluating teachers. And it included training modules and calibration to make sure that we could move forward with what we outlined in our employee evaluations policy a couple of years ago, to make sure the right supports were in place to ensure that our qualified observers and evaluators were sufficiently normed. The couple of things that we are adding here are an applicant tracking system and an onboarding elements. So these are things that we began with PowerSchool at a lower level in order to test them, and we've seen positive impact of that in speeding up our hiring process and making things more user-friendly for both our candidates and for our hiring managers. And what I would highlight about this is that in the absence of having this or some other solution in place last year, when the school building closures happened, we would have been in significant trouble to actually go forward with a hiring process. And through this product, we were able to adapt and do everything except fingerprinting online. So all of the work, all of the paperwork and other things that typically have been offline were incorporated into the solution that PowerSchool offers. So we're trying to continue with that applicant tracking system and onboarding component.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bondima, is your hand up from a previous question?
Is it my hand up? Is it down?
It's down now. Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Chief Grant Skinner. There are no more questions. I believe we have one person for public comment today. Good morning, Mr. Gaber.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to y'all. I am here. My name is Corey Gaber, and I know you've seen my face before speaking on behalf of the Baltimore Teachers Union. Today, I'm actually speaking not on behalf of the Baltimore Teachers Union, but on behalf of the Coalition for Police-Free Schools. And so, again, thank you for your time and hearing me out. You know, this coalition for police-free schools in Baltimore City crafted a petition. And in that petition, it's received 600 individual signatures and actually 23 organizational sign-ons, including a lot of heavy hitters. And at the February 23rd full school board meeting, about 9 of the 10 public comments were parents, young people, and educators who were all speaking to the need for future city schools that are free of police and meets everyone's needs. We would love a written response from the board in response to this petition and the sentiments expressed by those public commenters, responding to the earnest thoughts of community members who put in a lot of time to testify, rather than, you know, zero direct interaction is what would build trust, relationships, and the ability to truly collaborate with stakeholders. Even with the excellent leadership from Chief Ham, even with many individual officers who form deep bonds with students, and even with the improved training and decrease in arrests, the majority of young people still believe we should move towards a Baltimore City public school system that is police-free. In the most recent Youth as Resources survey, they asked the question, do you believe that Baltimore City public schools should be police-free? 58.6% said yes. 21.2% said no, and 20.2% said maybe. In other words, only about 1 in 5 students in this youth survey said definitively that we should have police in schools. Members of the coalition are not ignorant of the realities on the ground and know that the changes we're asking for would take years to transition to. Our schools are not ready to go cold turkey, and we do not yet have a system-wide alternative position set up for our many wonderful officers to transition into. We have models for what's possible, though. See our Baltimore Curriculum Project schools, whose investment in and implementation of restorative practices has shown that school communities are capable of creating physically and emotionally safe communities without the intervention of school police officers. The coalition imagines a day where every city school not only has a full-time nurse and community schools coordinator, but also a fully funded restorative practices coordinator. We've even developed a draft description of the roles and responsibilities of such a position that I'll share with the operation committee members together with the aforementioned petition over email. We invite you to dream with us, not about incremental improvements on the status quo, but of a transformed future city schools where students and staff are accountable to each other and have the resources to prioritize de-escalation, reconciliation, and restoration in the face of trauma and harms caused. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gaber. Is there, Commissioner Reed, you understood what I was trying to say?
Okay, I just this is just a sidebar. I'd like to thank Blaine and Cynthia and your groups for I guess you've been working with this committee for a while in terms of, I saw the impact in some of the studies. I saw funding sources. I saw the budget implications. I saw the effectiveness. So thank you very much for making this easier for our committee. But also, I guess my question is, can we take it to the next derivative possibly? I'm just throwing this out there, Madam Chair. The next derivatives in terms of like, when we see money coming out, is there somewhere we can see the drawdown? How much we started with, where we are now, or in cases where you increase it, where the money went before, how it's been doled out, and also the amount spent. I mean, that probably helps us in terms of creating a daisy chain in terms of this flow of funds. But you guys have done a great job in terms of sources, impact, implications, and effectiveness. I appreciate that. But I guess the question is, when you do a good job, people like me ask for more. So I guess my question is, there some way we can look at the drawdowns and the amount spent, that kind of stuff?
Okay, really quickly, Commissioner Reed, just because I want to be respectful of our guest, Mr. Gabriel, who offered public comment around school police. I did want to, honor that space, and I wasn't sure if you had a comment associated with his public comment from you or Commissioner Bondima, because I did see Chief Perkins Cohen join and Chief Washington. And so if there was any comments specific, we can circle back to your point, Commissioner Reed, but I just wanted to honor the space of Mr. Gaber's comments for public comment.
I guess the one thing that registered with me is he says schools are not ready to go cold turkey. So I would like to know from him what his ideas is in terms of the transition, because it's a transition. It's not a, like he said, you can't go cold turkey. So if he's making a recommendation, a proposal, I'd like him also to show in that proposal how he would expect us to make that transition.
Thanks for the question, Commissioner Reed, and I'll definitely follow up with some more specifics in an email that would lay out what we think a reasonable timeline and what the major elements would be. A quick overview would be that developing the position of a restorative practices coordinator at every school that would not be associated with school police officers. And then over the course of a few years, you would be slowly redirecting the resources that are currently invested in school police and transition that money towards the Office of Student Wholeness and School Wellness. I may be forgetting the exact title of that budget item. And then that money would go towards hiring these new positions. In the meantime, what you're doing is you're slowly working with current school police officers as well as other community members who play a major role in our schools, who act as mentors. There are other programs such as Safe Streets that have alternatives and violence interrupters that don't involve police, to work with those people to get the training necessary and the credentials in place to either for the first time get hired into this new role or transition from school police officer into this new role, so that in the course of 3 to 4 years, you are slowly shifting from a culture of relying on school police for certain issues to relying on professionals who are highly trained specifically in restorative practices and all the other degrees that our counselors and school psychologists have in order to address these issues in a proactive way that's more humane.
Commissioner Bondima?
Yeah, very interesting, and I would really like to look at if you guys have done national research on that process and looked at other schools or other districts that have done and put in place what you're talking about, and not just for the state of Maryland, but I would really, or also for the state of Maryland. But it would be very interesting to do some. And could you, when you do the research, could you present it to the board, or could you present it to us or send it to us and give us more information. And I'm sure that we will be doing our research as well. But I would love to see the research that you follow up on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonzima. Really quickly, I think Mr. Gaber said that he did plan to send us some information.
Is that possible?
And I think that there was some data that you included in your testimony today. If you could also just provide your statement to Mr. Gant, that would be really helpful. Chief Perkins-Cohen.
Yes, thank you. And thanks so much for this conversation. I mean, this is a really important conversation, and we've been, really working on this issue for a long time since Dr. Santelises and I started, and since Chief Ham has been in place, and really looking at school police, addressing the school police policies and changing them, addressing the training issues and selection of officers issue, and then putting in the kind of practices that Mr. Gaber mentions, like restorative practices and student wholeness and having wellness coordinators. So there is a lot of different ways to address the issues that Mr. Gaber's raising. That we are I think aligned on different ways to address these issues of having multiple ways that you're preventing. The issue is you want to try to prevent create cultures and climates where you're preventing incidents at schools as opposed to reacting to incidents. And I think that's what we've tried to do with the training with officers, having officers have relationship with students, having those restorative practices in place, and having wellness rooms and so on where we can. I think a couple of things is that I still think there is going to be need for a role for police officers. We have, as the data that Major Coleman presented indicates, we've greatly reduced the number of arrests. So with 19 so far this year and 36 last year, down from, if we go to 2012-13, we had 478 or 489 in 13-14. So we've seen a dramatic reduction in arrests, and those arrests are for serious. They're only for serious incidents. We used to have, one thing we've systematically really worked on is making sure that officers are not involved in disciplinary issues. They should not be telling you to tuck in your shirt. There's just no reason why they should be engaged in that conversation. That's a disciplinary issue for the for the principal. It's not for the police officer. And so by reducing those interactions and all the training we've done is some of the ways we've reduced it, but the arrests that have occurred are for things like an attack on an adult or a student or a firearm incident or arson. So serious things that you would have to bring an officer in for. And I would rather, frankly, it be our officers who know our students, who have a relationship with our students, and who have positive relationships with the school than not. I think that transition that Corey talks about is really important, and I think we need to figure out, I personally still think school police are going to be an important part of schools, but continuing to work to make sure that they're only that we're mostly proactive and preventing situations, and they're only coming in the most extreme cases, which I think we're close to when you're talking about an arrest rate of 36 or 19. I think that is what you're seeing. I think even in schools where we're doing restorative practices, and as the former executive director of the curriculum project, I know the work that they do really, really well, and they too call the police. So they call us too when they have instances. So they have great school climate. They have done incredible work on restorative practices. And then when they have a serious issue, they too have to call school police. And so it's good to have officers who know the community and can come in and respond. And so I think it's the right conversation, and we have to keep pushing ourselves to get better to make sure that the way we support students is effective, and keep gathering information. We do our school assessment every year too, our school report card on police, and so we should share that as well because it's a representative sample of students and has kind of different outcomes, so we should share that with you as well. But we have to keep having this conversation and providing the support to our officers for the training that they need to have the more restorative approach that we want, and having other supports in place. Like that's why we put in social workers in place, prioritizing those culture climate type supports that help prevent there being instances in the first place.
Commissioner Bonzima, I saw your hand go up, and then Commissioner Reed.
Well, my hand went up, and I'm gonna take it down because I got lost and got cut off. But I'm back, and I didn't hear the final conversation with Corey Gaber. So
Mr. Gabriel's still on. We're still in that same.
I think. Thank you. I think I got cut off and had to come back in, Mr. Gaber. So I didn't hear all of your all of the things that you said.
Well, that's actually a great commercial break to remind you and others that may have missed that wonderful dialogue that this meeting is recorded and is housed on YouTube. And so at the conclusion of our meeting, I'm not sure what the timeline is, but typically about an hour out, we can circle back and see the recording.
Okay, thanks. So we can move on then.
Commissioner Reed had his hand up.
I think my head is down, right?
It's up.
I'm cool.
Now it's down.
It's down. Good grief. Thank you.
Chief Perkins Cohen, you made some good counterpoint statements. So, and it would benefit me to get also your ideas and district's ideas in terms of, as you alluded to, our officers know our students better. So if our officers know our students better than Baltimore City Public School, Baltimore City Police, how do we work arm in arm with the social scientists, the psychologists, in terms of that wholeness effort? I mean, because you say public schools, police are part of the wholeness effort. How do we make it better with having those police vis-a-vis asking the city police department to intervene? So, I mean, that was something I would.
For the city police, you mean? How would we make it better for the city police?
No. If we don't have an embedded police department, you're saying it's a lot more complicated because the city police don't know our students. So what's the argument for having our police department, the school police department, because they're part of the restorative practices, because they're part of prevention, because they engage with our school social workers and psychologists? What would we miss if we don't have those police?
Yeah, I think
that's the other side of the coin.
Was that it? Yeah. I think really what Chief Hammond and the school police have done really is a national model, and he's getting a lot of calls from national leaders about what he's done because of the precipitous decline that we've seen in the arrest rate and the robust training protocols that he's put in place for police officers. And at the time when Dr. Santelises and I first came in, when the consent decree was occurring, that was a time when we did weigh about whether we wanted to, shift, potentially transition to a police force through the city, and really felt like we wanted to have our own officers for the reasons we talked about, that we could decide what the training is. We could do, Chief Hamm has done a lot of work with police officer selection, that who he's hiring in the first place. And then the training that they're receiving. And that, like I said, you can see in the numbers. I mean, it just is really palpable, the difference in the numbers that you see, which is pretty unusual. And from school districts across the country, that kind of drastic change in the numbers, and just focus on arrests should only be happening in really severe circumstances. And that's what we're seeing. And so, police force should remain small, and we need to keep, again, working on it, and we can always try to figure out if there are better ways to approach this. But we have I also don't want to lose sight of the fact that we have made a huge amount of progress and really are kind of a model in terms of the way that we are handling school police. And I certainly wouldn't trade at first switch to a city police anytime soon.
We actually have Commissioner Brooks in attendance, and I see his hand up. Commissioner Brooks?
Yes, so sorry, so I completely had to jump off because of work, and then I had to jump back on. So you might have already answered this question. And so Allison, could you talk to me about any student level data, any school level data that says they want school police? Do we have anything that talks about their needs from their perspective?
So we have surveys that we've done the last few years. With the pandemic, I think we I'm trying to remember if we did it last year, so I'll have to look to see the last time we did it. But we did we worked with student groups to develop a school survey that was the questions that they developed and gave it to a representative sample of students and got it out to schools. And the results were pretty positive about, at that time, this was kind of before the questions were being asked about whether people want school police, but they were about how do they feel about their officers and how they interact with their officers. And they were quite positive. The responses to those surveys were quite positive. So as we look at future surveys, we could certainly add questions like that. And we have bandwidth to reach more students and a more representative sample. And so we can certainly do that, which is why we partner with students in the first place, to make sure we are asking their questions in a methodologically sound way that was representative of students across schools. And so that's what we had done with those surveys.
Great. And so is it possible for you to send that data over to me or to us as a collective? Sure. But also want to sort of be sort of, my question is not whether or not like their experience with the school police assumes that the police are going to be there, right? And so my question is around like, did you ask them, did they want school police in their buildings? And I feel like that's the distinction that I'm trying to get at. And if we haven't asked that question, why haven't we chosen to go down that line versus to assume that we want the school police there?
So again, I'm pretty sure that those questions we had were developed by students and with students. And I think at the time, I'm pretty sure I'm right that was not a question that they asked at that time. But as I said, we could certainly, talk about that as a question in the future. But that was not a question we asked at the time. It was more about interactions with police and their feelings about school police. But it was not that specific question, I don't think. But I will pull out those surveys that we had, and I'm happy to share that with the board again.
Awesome, thank you.
Mr. Gaber, your hand's been up for quite a bit.
Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to respond specifically to a couple of points. One is that the district's main youth partners in developing those past surveys was Youth as Resources students. There were others, but YAR was the primary partner, and Youth as Resources has signed on to the coalition's petition. So they are in favor of this position. Their board specifically considered it and voted in favor of that. Baltimore Algebra Project and Community Law and Action Youth have also signed on as organizations. So 3 of the biggest student organizations have publicly voiced that they support a police-free schools future. As the past surveys were created, they did not include an explicit question about whether they believed school police should be in city schools or not. They were, as Chief Perkins-Cohen said, specifically about the quality and the type of interactions that they were having and their feelings about those interactions. So this most recent YAR survey that I referenced, and I'll share the data for, is the first survey that explicitly asked that question. And the results from that survey did indicate that students wanted police-free schools.
Yeah, and I would love to see that data. And I would also just, one challenge that has happened in the past is that in terms of getting a representative sample and methodology. And so we know that there, because again, it's just, there's a bandwidth issue of how you reach students. And I know in previous surveys, and I've not seen the results of this one, I know in previous surveys, there were focus groups. For example, my own child was included in one of the focus groups. The sample sizes were generally small in previous iterations. And my own child was included in a focus group about their asking questions about their police officer at a time when he was in middle school and didn't have a police officer, and that was his responses were part of that survey. So, and that was kind of indicative of, and then there was, and that one, they asked the concerns about like what was the major, where was the schools with the biggest concerns about their officer, because we want it to be actionable. And so where there wasn't the methodology in place for us to be able to decide, to discern where the information came from in those previous surveys, so that we couldn't act on it. And in questions like what were the schools that had the largest problem, the ones that came up was Coppin. And Coppin is actually not our police, that's actually Coppin police. So there were just some methodological issues that made it difficult to use that. And so that's why we were trying to partner with Youth as Resources and others to get their questions and then put them out in a way that does give us a representative sample. But to your point, Commissioner Brooks, we're happy to look at more updated questions. They were the questions that youth had at the time, but we're happy to I have to talk to Chief Jones about where we are this year and about whether we're going to try to take on. Surveys are tough in this environment, and so whether we're going to try to take it on right now, I think is a question. Just because again, trying to get a representative sample is a little challenging in this environment. But I will certainly take all this back to her and talk to her about that.
Mr. Gaber, thank you so much for joining us today. We had such a robust conversation around school police and what that looks like in terms of best serving our students. Know that you're always welcome for public comment at the operations committee.
And he
I
gets
really
around.
appreciate it.
He was at Kerwin yesterday, so the man gets around, I can tell you that.
Chief Perkins Cohen killed it in her comments in response to some disingenuous and pretty crappy questions from a Sinclair controlled person. Anyhow, another conversation for another time. But I really do appreciate the opportunity and the actual interaction. I really appreciate the conversation and would invite more of that with the coalition. We'll reach out and see if there's opportunities to have further discussions about that forward-looking future and the possibilities that we could put in place.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Always appreciate talking to you, Corey.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Gaber. Commissioner Reed, I wanted to circle back to a couple of points that you noted earlier around the construction of the procurement. And one of the takeaways that I had listed, you wanted to see a drawdown from the budget.
Yeah, I guess it helps in terms of, like I said, I'm sorry I put the horse before the cart in terms of jumping Mr. Gaber, because he, Allison, and Darrell were really helpful. I really appreciate that. But I guess looking at the ops, I mean, we've come a long way in terms of, as I said, funding sources, impact, budget implications, effectiveness. And I was just wondering how we can just be more additive in terms of how where the money's being drawn down from, how much is being drawn down, what's left, and what if future expectations of that money. Because we always know there are sources and pools, be it grants, be it the basic budget. But I guess what we need to know is the daisy to where the money's going in the different groups, because we see a lot of money coming out for elevators, we see a lot of money coming out for ventilators, things like that. It just helps us to learn the pool of funds and also what's left. I don't know if I'm making sense or not.
No, you make perfect sense, and that bubbles something up for me. Mr. Gant and Chief Perkins Cohen, I believe we do get a yearly report around the comprehensive spending. And so to Commissioner Reed's point, that I think what you're asking for is a bit more niche than what we've been receiving, where it doesn't have a drawdown associated with it, just more of an allocation of how it was spent, correct?
That's the way I see it.
So, and you're asking vendor by vendor, or are you asking, so you want to know if we approved, making this up, $10 million for a vendor X, you want to know how far we are against that, or you want to know from the CARES Act or from the ESSER grant, if we said we were going to spend 10 million in air filters, where are we on that, or both?
Yeah, I'm just thinking product groups. We X amount for, like we know, a lot of the CARES is going to ventilators. So that's not as important. How much are we spending on ventilators? How much will be spent down? How much are we spending on elevators? How much will be spent down? I mean, because we're starting to see a few items more often than others. And it gets to be repetitious, but it's not repetitious because it's different schools.
So if I can add one thing, Commissioner Reed, I think that one of the things that's also important is that there is a difference between the maintenance dollar from the general funds and then the capital dollars. So I think that that's very important for us to flag, because a lot of the work that Mr. Lipsky is going to present as the director of maintenance is going to be coming from our general funds. And so we can definitely show the spend down from there. The work that Cindy Smith is presenting is capital related, and it's coming from state and local dollars. And so therefore, what they're presenting to you is the full contract for that particular project, if it's an elevator project or what have you. Generally, what Cindy does is that she provides a presentation to the operations committee that provides the annual CIP, and then she gives a mid-year. And during the mid-year, she basically talks about where those projects are within the process. And so she's not going to come back to the board about that particular vendor and that project because it's a capital project and it's a one-time. Whereas Blaine will, because there's a number of vendors under a particular contract that's being supported. So there can be a drawdown that we can discuss for the maintenance dollars, but for the capital dollars, it's a one-time, this is what the CIP project is that we present to the board, it's approved by the board, and then we come in mid-year and say, this is where we are on the status of this project within this individual school.
Okay, so capital is one time, maintenance is pay as you go. And what about, and is the third grants? Would grants be a third?
Right. And so grants would be something different this year, right? Because we don't make, and from an operations perspective, we don't depend on grants. But now because of ESSER dollars and all of those different dollars, now, yes, we do depend now on grants to fund and support some of operations work.
Okay. Okay. So whatever you can help to make me smarter in terms of how that works, I don't know. But I know we're seeing a lot more in grants. Like you said, this is this year.
Yes.
But capital confuses the hell out of me. That's it.
And we could take more time clearing that up for you too. We can definitely invest more time in that.
Thank
you. And Commissioner Reed, would you imagine it's like on an annual basis, or you wanted it like a one time, or as part of like ops, or you just need to think on it?
I defer to my chair. That gets out of my my wheelhouse. I don't know. I really don't know.
And you want it to be an ops view, because I guess so. I want to try to get you what you need. We do sometimes grant updates, so that would give you a view of what's spending on grants, but that would be, you know, some ops thing. It would be some testing pieces. It would be different. It wouldn't be all ops. It would be a more mixed view of everything we spent with the grant dollars. Then we sometimes do CIP updates. So as Joe put in the chat, we have one coming up on May 18th where you would get some CIP pieces, and then you know, finance does some general fund updates. But those are all kind of different views of slightly different things. So I don't know if it's that you want kind of an operations focus of an update on if it's particularly about, say, mitigation strategies like the ventilation strategy, where that is being spent and from where the various pots, like that's one look. And so I just want to make sure we're getting at what it is that you particularly want to see.
I guess you're making a great point, Allison. It has to emanate somewhere.
Yeah.
Percolate to the board. So some committee has to see all the numbers where we can help the board understand how definitive it is. Does that make sense? If everybody's seeing something different and it doesn't add up, it creates confusion.
So what we're trying to increasingly when we do the finance piece is to have that be more of the full picture, that it includes the ESSER, the grants, and general funds. It doesn't generally do the CIP because that's just a separate pot of money. But it does include the finance, the general funds pieces, and the grant. So that would give you a part of the picture.
See, this is the closest committee we have to a finance committee, though, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And is it COVID related expenses primarily, or in general, you want to be able to track just on an ongoing basis where spending is in comparison to what you approved in terms of the procurement process?
I'm speaking for one person, but I'm thinking long-term, big picture.
Yeah. I will say Commissioner Reed has been asking about this in different, I think this is the closest that we've gotten to what the ask actually is, though.
So maybe offline, if maybe we could just have a conversation offline, just to make sure we're really getting under the hood of what it is that you want. So we're giving you something that's responsive.
Yeah, because I think in terms of us being accountable, we need to know where the money goes and understand it to articulate it.
Yeah, makes sense.
Or perhaps you all could join us on a Friday. We could just all talk about it. That might be, you know, since we're already there anyway, to talk, talk about. I'm talking about Commissioner Reed and Commissioner Roberts can maybe join our meeting for a little bit and just so we can kind of through what they want. That's what I'm kind of proposing.
So I think we need Chief Doherty there as well. So we might have to create something separate, but yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
If the Commissioner Brooks, your hand.
one question about the ERP, and I had got through most of the school police presentation, but I got that just so maybe it's more of a comment, wondering about how we're linking. So I'm super excited about the ERP, but then thinking about all of the data points that we want to gather. So I know that we talked about making sure that every department feels like the system is going to be responsive to them. But things like sort of like systemically collecting demographic data, right? So what are the capabilities there, and making sure that some of my issue areas, how we're collecting sexual orientation and gender identity questions, how are they showing up in the ERP across all of the different departments that the ERP will actually support? Will it be able to track, and Commissioner Roberts, you might have already responded to this or gotten this, will it be able to easily track minority businesses and who they are, and sort of all of those particularities in the back end somewhere that we could see as output at some other point in time? So I just was a functionality type question.
Those questions actually were not asked. I'm not sure if the team, is there anyone from ITD or?
Yes, this is Tylesh Watkins from the ITD. And so I think I can partially answer your question, but we'll have more detail once we select the solution. But the idea for the new ERP is to have a system that allows us to have a single version of the truth, with all the data being passed as close to real time as possible. So specific data elements like what you're requesting would be elements that we would necessarily have to customize or track depending on what particular application or module is being created. So to give you specifics, I'd have to wait until we pick the final solution, and then we could have some discussion around, are we selecting those data elements, and what modules would we be picking those up in, and how would we be able to make that data available? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so sometime down the line. So, okay, great. And Allison, would we be able to use that ERP system to send out our surveys district-wide to like streamline all of that data collection?
You mean the surveys? Which surveys do you mean? Like the parent surveys?
Like the parent surveys, like all of those other things. I know that like some of the our communication that goes out comes from different departments. I'm just wondering if there's some way to sort of create the survey inside and then send it. I didn't know. Just was curious.
I don't know either. So I can ask, but I mean, parents wouldn't be in the ERP. I don't think their data would as much be in there, and students wouldn't be as much. So, and we have survey tools. So I think that's probably not how we would do that, but let me ask the experts to make sure I'm right about that. I think those we usually do through other mechanisms where we have their contact information and not necessarily through the ERP. Now, a staff survey potentially would make sense to do it that way.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
I don't believe there are any more questions, and we are 5 minutes. I think we are ending 5 minutes early. Thank you, everyone.
What's wrong with you? Gosh.
I know. I'm shocked. I'm shocked. But thank you, everyone, for joining today's operations meeting. We had such robust conversation around ERP implementation, school police, and the myriad of procurements that we had. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day.
Hey, you also. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Hey, bye.